I use the word myth. I don't use the word stories because stories are of different kinds. Politicians also tell stories. That's a kind of stories. Bollywood also tells stories. Fiction writers tell stories. Journalists tell stories. Myth is a kind of a story that even historians don't understand. The best academicians in our country or the world don't understand. It's a subject that has been sort of given a stepmotherly treatment across the world for various reasons, for historical reasons. So Bhagavad Gita, which is a battlefield story and is very, very violent story, will not be told inside the house. The mothers won't tell their children about Bhagavad Gita. They will tell you about Radha Krishna. And the stories which the mother tells is where Hinduism emerges. This kind of a book telling Hindus how to be Hindu is a West Asian concept brought to India by the British. Indian storytelling is everything has a cost. It's an accounting system. Everything. Remember, in India, as I said, accountability is the key word. Yamaraj is the god of death. He's the god of accounting. And everything is about accounting. You are accountable for everything. This concept doesn't exist in the West. So even our children are being raised by saying you're not accountable. Everybody loves Draupadi because she screams and yells and asks for blood. But it is Sita's children who become kings. Draupadi's children die. I think she's a very smart woman.
Hey everyone, I'm Vikram Chandra. This is the India Story podcast. And when you're talking about the India story, one of the people it's a real pleasure to talk to is Devdutt Pattanaik, who in a sense has been scripting one of the most important parts of the India story, India's old stories, India's ancient stories, India's mythology, the stories and the tales and the lessons that very much form part of our culture. That it's a pleasure and a privilege to be talking to you because the way you've brought so many of those stories to life and interpreted them. So do you think that is part of what you've been doing? You're not just telling the stories because sometimes we feel we know these stories. Everyone knows the Ramayan, everyone knows the Mahabharat. And yet maybe there's some additional layers that we are picking up when we read what you're writing.
So I use the word myth. I don't use the word stories because stories are of different kinds. Politicians also tell stories. That's a kind of stories. Bollywood also tells stories. Fiction writers tell stories. Journalists tell stories. Myth is a kind of a story that even historians don't understand. The best academicians in our country or the world don't understand. It's a subject that has been sort of given a stepmotherly treatment across the world for various reasons, for historical reasons. And really, people haven't captured what mythology actually is. You can't talk about a culture without talking about its mythology. We can say things like, Chinese are different from Indians. But in what way? How are Chinese different from Indians? If you study their stories, you will be able to see the difference very clearly. And that's what I do. I tell the stories, but I want people to see how is an Indian story different from a Chinese story? How is Shakespeare different from Kalidas? Because the storytelling style is very different. The operating system is very different. And that's what I try to do, which is difficult to understand. So yes, I'm telling the Ramayan, but I want to reveal the Ramayan. I want people to understand how is Ramayan different from the Bible? How is it different from the Quran? The stories have a very different structure. The trajectory is very different. The assumptions are very different. That's what I do.
Could you share some examples of that? Because you're right, everyone knows the Ramayana, everyone knows the Mahabharat. So in what way are you adding layers or flavors to that, which are and to use your words, which are revealing more about the story?
So when I'm telling you the Ramayan, if I ask you what is the story, what is Ramayan about? And the traditional answer is the story of the great King Ram. But actually, it's not the story of the great King Ram. It is the story of the biography of Ram. From his birth to his death. So that's not the way people tell the stories, right? They give this climactic arch of victory and the great coronation. And that's how we tell the story as if it has a climax, a great climax. But that's not the way it's traditionally told. It is the birth of Ram till the death of Ram. When you read the Mahabharat, it's from the birth of the Pandavas to the death of the Pandavas. And in the case of Mahabharat, it goes even beyond the death to the afterlife of the Pandavas. So you're talking about what is a lived existence? What does it mean to be alive? And in case of Ram, it is more interesting because you're talking about someone who is considered divine. What happens when he lives the mortal life? So when an immortal lives amongst mortals, what are the challenges he faces? Now compare that with the Quran. The Quran tells you the story of a trader in a desert land who meets an angel who is talking through the angel to God. Now, when I write in English the word God, I use the word capital G. And that's a very political word because capital G. But when I say in Hindi, Bhagavan, Ishwar, Dev, which of these three words should I write with the capital G?
One of the other interesting aspects which emerges from that is that when you're telling those stories, I'm sure you must also be struggling to say which is the story, because to the same example you use, the Quran is one. There is one Quran. That's the revealed truth. According to Muslims, this is the revealed truth. And every word is the same and everyone knows what those words are. You can literally memorize it. The Ramayan or the Mahabharat or many of our great myths or as works of mythology, which is the correct version?
This burden of it being correct comes from where? Who gives you this burden that it has to be true? Now, what happens in West Asian mythologies? So West Asian mythology is the Quran, the Bible. There is an authority which says this is the only way you shall think. This is the only story that we will allow you to have. There will be no alternate versions. There are alternate versions for scholars. Scholars know about all the alternate versions that exist. For example...
I mean, the New Testament, you will have, there are 4 different, Gospels. Then you can probably extrapolate that to some of the hidden Gospels. So there could be some different ways of telling the story.
Let me give you an example. For example, you have heard the story of Cain and Abel.
Yeah.
But there are Arabic versions of it. There are Persian versions of it. We have had an Islamic population for such a long time, but how many of us have been told the story of Habil and Qabil? Habil and Qabil are the Persian and the Arabic versions of Cain and Abel. Now, I know Cain and Abel because I read about Cain and Abel in the Old Testament. Nobody told me the story of Habil and Qabil. But Habil and Qabil is a story which is told in Persia, in Arab countries. And the version of Habil and Qabil and Cain and Abel is very different. So, there are versions of the stories which exist. And Habil and Qabil are referred to as part of the hadiths. So you have this whole, lots of alternate versions of the stories. But the authority, is telling you shall not hear those stories. This is the only story you shall hear. In India, there is no authority. There is no one who will tell me this is the authoritative version. You can have a small group of people with a Guruji telling them, yehi padho. But in India, that burden doesn't exist in our country. It is difficult to have an authority in India because of our diversity and the dynamism that exists in our country. There is no one Ramayan, there is no one Mahabharat, there is no one Ved. Everything is different.
Bhagavad Gita and some others, there is a more definitive version of this is what it is.
See, the popularity of Bhagavad Gita is only 200 years old. We give it too much importance because the British put the burden on us that you have to have a holy book. And we were answerable to the master, the colonial master. And Vedas had many gods. And in the British colonial period, many gods were seen as pagan. So Indians were like, no, we are not pagans. We are religious people. We have got also one God. And Bhagavad Gita fit the bill because you have one God, Krishna talking about it. So from a polytheistic Veda, which was very popular in the 18th century translations, by the late 19th century, you have Bhagavad Gita becoming the most important Hindu book. And this burden that Hindus also need to have a holy book, and it has to be this one single book, is a 100-year-old phenomena. It didn't exist before 100 years. Nobody bothered with it.
Is that really the case? Because I thought one of the things that people say about the Gita is that it's like the distillation of everything that the Upanishads have and the holy books have. And so that is, the philosophy.
That's a very Brahminical way of thinking. And most Indians don't approach Hinduism. What is Hinduism for most Indians? Whatever the mother tells you, right? At home, whatever you do. So if I go to a home of people, I go to ordinary people's home, what the mother teaches them, what the pujas they do in the house, the rituals that they perform, the festivals that they do, that's how they learn. Nobody taught them, Krishna said this. Krishna is a Vaishnav document. The Shaivas won't follow it. The Shaktas won't follow it. There is no Bhagavad Gita playing an important role in Jagannath Puri temple rituals. It's Gita Govind which is important. So in Jagannath temple, which is now very famous about Rath Yatra, when every day the Lord goes to sleep, he wears a cloth which is woven with the poetry of Geet Govind, not Bhagavad Gita. So Bhagavad Gita, which is a battlefield story and is very, very violent story, will not be told inside the house. The mothers won't tell their children about Bhagavad Gita. They will tell you about Radha Krishna. And the stories which the mother tells is where Hinduism emerges. This kind of a book telling Hindus how to be Hindu is a West Asian concept brought to India by the British. And I think the founding fathers of our country were sort of answerable to the British. You and I don't carry that burden. I don't carry that burden. I don't need to be answerable to a white guy. So that burden doesn't exist. So I can read India differently. I don't need the Bhagavad Gita to understand Hinduism.
So is that an important part? You said that the mythology and it's a very important part of your culture. So based on what you are saying, that is the lesson that has come down to the people of this culture through the generations. There are different versions. There's no one to really tell you what is right or wrong. There's no one to tell you this is the book or this is not the book. So to that extent, it is ingrained in our culture. Maybe that's where the diversity and the tolerance comes from. It's ingrained in our culture for 3,000 years.
So let me decode the question that you asked me. You use the word right and wrong. This itself at a construction level is Western, not Indian. Indians would say is that what am I accountable for? Accountability is the key word in India, not right and wrong. Right and wrong is haram, halal. So wrong is haram and right is halal. God, the Bible has the commandments. This is the way you shall live your life, right and wrong. So the legal system in India is based on what is right and wrong. And so we have a judge deciding what is right and wrong. And today we know when we look at the judiciary system that right and wrong is a political concept. What is right and what is wrong? And we look at the judges with cynicism and we question it. The idea of Judgment Day comes from the West. There is Qayamat. Judgment. Hinduism does not have Qayamat. There is no Judgment Day. God is not a judge. Krishna is not a judge. Ram is not a judge. Shiva is not a judge. Vishnu is not a judge. We don't have a judge. We never valued judges. What we talk about is accounting. Lekha Jokha. What do you owe society? What are your obligations to society? What are your responsibilities? Bada bhai ho tum bade bhai ho. That means you have to take responsibility. Ram is bada bhai. He is not taking responsibility, or should he take responsibility? How does Bharat behave as a younger brother? What is your responsibility? So the language is different. It's not right and wrong. It's, are you responsible? Are you being responsible? Are you being accountable? So that is not the language which today in the 21st century we associate with Hinduism, because we are wiping it out. We are erasing something which is foundational to our culture, which is about debt. It's about what I give you and what I receive from you. Debit and credit, which is Paap and Punya. So Paap doesn't mean wrong, and Punya, that's a wrong translation. So if I ever read however big a scholar is, if he says Paap is bad things and Punya is good things, you know he doesn't understand Hinduism.
I thought that Paap is sin and Punya is good deeds.
This is the colonized mind at work. This is how deeply colonized we are. Paap is an action which creates debt. And Punya is an action which gives you credit. Now you remember, we are a rebirth culture. Hinduism is about rebirth. Buddhism is about rebirth. Jainism is about rebirth. Rebirth as an idea only exists in South Asia. It doesn't exist in China. It doesn't exist in India. For thousands of years, we are a culture which has told you that this life is not the only life you have led. You carry the burdens of your past life. That is how we explained tragedies. Why do your parents have to be so good and my parents have to be so bad? They have no explanation. There is still no explanation, but they gave you a cultural explanation. Ye tumhara karma hai. And you can't argue with karma. In the West Asia, they'll say, Inshallah, God's will. So the explanation is God's will, but we don't have a God to blame it on, so we will blame it on karma. So it is you are responsible for it, but in your past life.
One of the things that the big holy books, again, I know that I'm getting elements of Western
Please do
Asia
that.
and other things into it, but one of the concepts that the great mythological works is that it teaches you what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong, coming back to that, what is moral, what is immoral. And to that extent, you get some sort of a code by which you live your life.
Yeah.
You're saying that in Hindu culture and Indians cannot refer to any book to get that.
No. Because what is right for the rich cannot be right for the poor. You see, when we say that the law, let's look at the legal system, right? Everybody is equal before the law. But the fact is, the rich can afford a great lawyer who can twist anything. The poor can't. Today, right now, in jails across India, we have innocent people thrown in jails because of a justice system. Indians always understood that there is no such thing as one law for all. What is suitable for the rich is not suitable for the poor. Ram knows that. And Ramayana is about that. What applies to me will not apply to everyone else. This universality doesn't exist. So we have a very important phrase that is used in lots of Sanskrit texts. It will be Desha Kala Guna. Look at the time you are speaking, the geography of the people, and there is something called the personality of the people you're dealing with. So everything is dynamic and contextual. Everything is dynamic and contextual. You've been a journalist. You know how it works. What applies if I go to a Juggi Jhopadi in Bombay, I cannot apply the same principle that applies in my gated community in Bandra. If you say the same law applies, you are being very cruel.
Is that also the reason why sometimes it's tough to take lessons from people's conduct? Because if you look at the great works of Indian mythology, most people have a shade of grey. If you read the Mahabharat, for example, you say, okay, who's a really good person in this? There are shades of grey.
Yeah.
Yudhishthir, whom everyone says is the embodiment of Dharma. Somebody is to look at his conduct and you'd probably be scratching your head and saying, look, I mean, why was he the last person to reach till heaven?
Yeah.
He gambled away himself. He gambled away his family. He gambled away his wife. That is not necessarily righteous conduct.
See, we are using this Western filter of right and wrong. So Ramayana is seen through a Western, this is a judgment filter.
There's right and wrong whether it's Western or non-Western.
No, there
that
is no
conduct
right.
you could argue whether it's righteous or not.
There is no right and wrong. There is no right and wrong. Let me give you an example from the Ramayana. Let me explain it from a Ramayana. So this is how the Ramayana actually begins. One day there's a sage sitting in the forest and he suddenly hears a painful cry of someone being shot dead. He opens his eyes and sees a hunter has shot a male bird. And the male bird has died. And the female bird is crying and crying and crying, saying that my husband has been killed, my husband has been killed. And the sage gets so upset that he curses the hunter for doing this wrong thing. And he says, you are a bad guy. And he curses, and it comes out in the form of a poetry. It comes out in the, so shok se shlok nikla. Pain creates poetry. The curse comes in the form of a poetry. And he's alarmed by the beauty of the sound. And he's like, but this is a negative event. Why has it produced a positive poetry? And the hunter looks at him and says, you see this as a bad, good, but because of this, my children will eat today. We have not eaten for 7 days. I have killed this animal. Now I have got food to eat. And my children are going to eat a feast today. They're going to bless me. This bird whose husband has been killed is going to curse me. You have got poetry out of this tragedy. So I earn the credit for giving you the inspiration for poetry. So tell me, am I right or wrong? Judge this event. This judgment concept that there is right and wrong is a West Asian model. That's why China mocks the West today. Because it's saying that I don't understand your concept of, because we know that what is right and what is wrong is determined by the powerful. The powerful decide what is right and wrong, not the powerless. The powerless are always wrong.
But if you are to have society and you have to have some code of morality, even in our myths, you can always say, okay, this is the person who's done wrong. For Ravan to kidnap Sita, that was a wrong thing to do. If they are Rakshasas,
we can remove this framework. And that's what mythology is. Mythology says, what is the frame by which you look at an incident? That's what mythology does. The Chinese frame is different from the West Asian frame, is very different from the South Asian frame. South Asian frame is accountability. So Ravan's action, let me explain how Dharma works. So you use the word Dharma. Dharma doesn't mean right. That's a trend. Amar Chitrakatha created this thing that Dharma means right. Dharma means accountable. Accountable. Are you accountable? Accounting principles are not right and wrong principles. It's about debit and credit. And what does it mean? To understand Dharma, you have to understand the first avatar of Vishnu. The first avatar of Vishnu, the story is that there is a small fish which comes to Manu and says, save me from the big fish. And Manu says, okay, I'll save the small fish from the big fish. So this act of a big fish eating the small fish is called Matsya Nyaya, or what we would call today jungle law, where the big exploit the poor. So Manu picks up the small fish and says, I'll take care of you. And this is the beginning of Dharma, where you reverse the law of the jungle. And this is what Dharma is. But it doesn't end here. There's a Dharma Sankat, because the big fish says, what will I eat now? You have taken away my food. This is natural to me to eat a small fish. I didn't become carnivorous. Nature made me carnivorous. By saving the small fish. Now look at the same story I'm telling you, the bird fish. I'm still telling you the same story.
It comes up later again when that hawk is chasing the pigeon.
It keeps coming again and again, because the idea is consumption is violence. Any form of consumption is violence. Hindus realized it thousands of years ago. So the Ravan's deed is not wrong because he abducted Sita. It is you took advantage of a weaker person. She is weak and you are strong. And any relationship, when there is a strong and a weak person, you have two choices. Either you help the weak or you consume the weak. You are a rich, powerful man, and she is a helpless woman in the forest, and you have taken advantage of her. Now that puts you in debt. It doesn't make you wrong. It just puts you lower and lower in the status, because your accountability, she has got credit because she came out to feed you. She is taking huge risks. There are these barriers that don't feed anyone, don't help. She has come out to feed a hungry person. She has got all the credit in her hands and giving it to you. You are taking advantage of the small fish and behaving like the big fish and eating it, when you have the option not to do so. You have the option not to do so, but you choose not to exercise the option of being nice. You choose to be nasty and then give excuses that, but my sister nose was cut and all that. These are political excuses which anybody can whitewash their actions. And that is what Ramayana teaches you, that look, here is an educated Ravan whitewashing his actions. And look at Sita watching him. She's like, hello, I've come to feed you and you're abducting me. Don't you have any shame? So we don't tell children the stories this way. We're telling the stories from a very biblical perspective. This is right, this is wrong.
Okay, whichever perspective you interpret Dharma from. Let me come back to Yudhishthira, for example. At the end of the day, you were saying that, okay, you're doing quote unquote wrong things or bad things. You're getting debt. You're having debt put into you. You should be held accountable. That's why I'm talking about the shades of grey. He was the last person to be held accountable. He reached the very gates of heaven till he refused to go in because there was a dog with him. Having said that, if you look at the conduct before, many would question that conduct. If you're gambling away your family and your wife and you're putting them at risk, shouldn't that be putting you at more of a risk than somebody being vain about their appearance, which happened with some of the others?
If the story was being told in Arabia, I would agree with you. But we are not in Arabia. We are in India. So let me tell you the story. Listen to the story as Vyasa is telling it, not as Bollywood is telling it. Here is a man who is entering paradise with his own body. And he says, I will not enter without a dog, because dog is the lowest of all creatures. And everybody showering flowers on him and saying, what a great man he's demanding a dog be allowed to enter. But when he enters, the first thing he sees over there are the Kauravas. Now the Kauravas are the villains of the Mahabharata. But as per Vyasa, they are sitting in paradise. So Yudhishthira, the noble Pandava, enters paradise. And I'm not using the word heaven, I'm using the word paradise because it's Svarga, not Vaikuntha. They are two different words. He enters paradise and he sees the worst enemy sitting in front of him in heaven. And he's angry, he's saying, this is not fair, this is wrong, they are wrong people. So you have a problem with Yudhishthira entering heaven, but imagine Yudhishthira has a problem with Kauravas being in heaven. And all of them are in heaven. The Kauravas are in paradise, in Indraloka, Indra Sabha, and there is Yudhishthira. And they cannot live together, even in Svarga. And that's what the gods are looking at. He says, you couldn't live together on earth. You can't live together in paradise. You all can never live together. What have you learned from the war? You have massacred your cousins. You have ruled their kingdom for 36 years and you've still not forgiven them. If you can't forgive people, you really think paradise is yours. So Yudhishthira, you're not as noble as you imagine yourself to be. That's what the Mahabharata is saying. It's not telling you right and wrong. It's telling you imagine yourself to be a noble person. But you're not a noble person because there is your enemies whom you have slaughtered, whose kingdom you have ruled for 36 years. Is there an expiry date for your anger? When do you say it's okay, let it go, we can live together? There is no expiry date even in the middle of paradise. And that's what the Mahabharat, that's why it's called Mahabharat. But we do not teach our children this. We are too busy teaching them how to be judgmental. And because we are raising a generation of children to be judgmental, we wonder what the problem is.
Well, the question, first of all, I mean, you're mentioning children, so I'm just going to segue away into that for a little bit. How do children read or learn these stories? I know you've written some books for children, specifically targeting them. I know at the time I grew up, all that I learned about Indian mythology was through Amar Chitra Katha, and there was a very clear exposure to that. We all learned these stories from Amar Chitra Katha. How do our young children know their own mythology now?
Well, through parents. So if parents
sometimes don't know the stories themselves,
then their children are, and then they wonder why their children turn out the way they do. Because the children are to be, only two things parents can give their children. They can feed the children and they can educate their children. And if parents do not wish to participate in the nourishment, the physical and intellectual nourishment of their own children, and wish to outsource it to comic books and WhatsApp universities, then the accountability principle kicks in. You receive what you give. If you have denied your children your own values through conversation and have outsourced it to your staff, whatever you have given is what you will receive. And so you receive the children, you give. And that's what's going to happen. Nobody carries the burden of our children's upbringing. We carry the burden of our children's upbringing. If we do not invest in our own children, who else will?
But, in the earlier days, sometimes the grandparents would be doing that. You quite often learned these stories on the knees of your grandparents more than your parents. And also, children these days, they don't always want to sit with their parents and hear these stories, right? It sometimes can be, maybe sometimes there are other ways of communicating where they'll pick up the stories. Are you picking up both of those?
So it's about how they sit. Stories are not just told, it's also performed. So children don't hear what you hear. They hear what they are seeing around them. So it's called sanskara. The word in Sanskrit is sanskara. Sansar means the world. In the world, if you put ka matra is all your questions, right? You're a journalist. You ask kab, kyun, kaha, kaise. So kim in Sanskrit is kim. Why? Humans ask why. So sanskar is jab sansar ke upar aap prashna puchte ho. And how you educate the child, and because the child is curious, it's naturally curious, it's looking everywhere, it is experiencing new things, it's seeing new things, it's smelling new things, it's tasting new things. So you prepare the child. If you look at all our rituals, they're designed around preparing the child for the world it's going to encounter. And how you engage with the child at that time is what happens to the child. You can't control the child completely. It carries its own karmic burden. You don't bring the karmic burden. They're carrying the karmic burden in the Indian system. That every child has its own karmic burden. All you can do is prepare it to handle the privileges or whatever it is going to get in this world. And the way the child eats, the way the child sits, the way we sit on the dining table, who serves whom? Do you sit alone? Do you talk to each other? Does the father participate in the house? If the child is watching the father never participating in household activities, he watches the mother never participating in household activities, he sees his world surrounded by professional staff, the child is going to respond to the world very differently. And that's what children are now. Everything's digital. So we are getting the same Pokemon being seen around the world. So every child is seeing the world that way. Or I see some of those cartoons on Krishna and Bhima where the gods are always very violent. Bhima is beating up people and Krishna is beating up people and Ganesha is beating up people. And then we wonder why there is angry Hanuman being popular, because you have told people that gods are always angry and they're always fighting and screaming and shouting. Who gave that to the children? The earlier generation gave it to their children. So I see these people who talk about, we want to save our culture, but at the end of the day, they don't see how colonized they are. And we don't realize how we are shaping our minds because of stories which we are telling. Look at Harry Potter. Harry Potter is a story which ends, at the end of it, they're fighting each other. The good guys and the bad guys are fighting each other. Read Lord of the Rings. Good guys and the bad guys fighting each other. There is no aftermath. There's a after. Then there is the Bible, which talks about the apocalypse, the great battle between angels and demons. And then people tell me, but Ramayana is also about war. But I said, No. The war ends in Yuddha Kand, after which there is Uttarakand, the consequences of the war. You read the Mahabharata, the war ends in the 12th chapter. There are 6 chapters after that. 6 chapters, which even B.R. Chopra didn't put it on television. Because you don't want to because Indian storytelling is everything has a cost. It's an accounting system. Everything. Remember, in India, as I said, accountability is the key word. Yamaraj is the god of death. He's the god of accounting. And everything is about accounting. You are accountable for everything. This concept doesn't exist in the West. So even our children are being raised by saying you're not accountable. You're not accountable. Right and wrong doesn't have accountability. If I've done right, then I should get the rewards. But we all know you can be as right as you want and nothing will come to you. You can be the good guy in school. You can be the honest guy in school. And everybody's afraid, why do bad things happen to good people? The karma has an answer.
Well, the Gita does say that, right? Worry about the action. Don't worry about the rewards that you get for the action.
Because you are not in control of all the things that work for you. There are so many factors in this world. You can study very hard in the exams, but on that day, you must have written the best answer paper, but your teacher has fought with his wife. And therefore gives you bad marks because his bad mood comes into the picture. And because it's a subjective correction, he gives you bad marks and you get low marks. And you could lose a seat in the best university that you could have got. The possibilities are so many. Therefore, the Gita says, it is a culture where even God doesn't give you guarantees. Krishna is saying, I'm not giving you guarantees. Because there are so many factors at work that I cannot give you guarantee. Which other culture talks about a God who doesn't give you guarantees? Chinese don't even have a concept of God. The whole Chinese, there is no Chinese concept of God. They have a concept of heaven, which is a very vague term, but they do not have the concept of right, wrong. All there is compliance. Confucian compliance. That's it. You obey the system and life will be good for you. So the Chinese system is so different. I have yet to see scholars in India talking about Chinese mythology. You're dealing with China over there. You're dealing with the West over here. You don't know their mythologies, which means you do not know these cultures.
You've in fact written, you need to know other cultures. You've written a book on Greek mythology. Again, something where you did have gods and there were clearly no moral, you couldn't actually look at their conduct and saying what good people or bad people they are because Zeus and others did some rather terrible things if you actually look at it.
Well, if you look at the Bible, even God does terrible things. So the biblical God does genocide several times, so when one talks about the Old Testament and the New Testament, so this good bad concept is a very clever political idea. What is good is a complex question which everybody knows. What is the good life? Because Indian society said, good life comes at the cost of violence. Because if you want to have a meal, you have to kill something. Either a tree or an animal. Either a plant life or an animal life. Flesh is flesh. So when you read the Shatapatha Brahmana, for example, trees are screaming silently. Nobody talks about this. The vegetarians don't want to hear the Shatapatha Brahmana, which is a Vedic text, where the trees are always screaming. When you cut them, they're screaming. So in the kitchen, when you cut a vegetable, it's screaming silently, saying that next life I'll eat you. And you will scream silently. This is from the Bhrigus. I can give you the references after references. So Indian thought functions very differently. Look at the Greek mythology, for example. Greek mythology is based on achievement. Are you extraordinary or ordinary? So when you die, there is Judgment Day. The Greeks had Judgment Day. They had only one life. One life, one Judgment Day. And if you have angered the gods in some way, they'll throw you in Tartarus. So why are you in Tartarus? Not for moral or ethical reasons, just because gods didn't like you. That's the only reason. The ordinary guys would go to asphodel fields, mediocre. But if you're extraordinary and you're special, you'll go to Elysium. You'll go to the Elysial fields. That's where special people will be. The heroic beings, the entrepreneur, the innovator, the special, the great ones. So they have divided the world into mediocre people, great people, and those who upset the elite.
Well, actually, in Greek mythology, you could be reborn if you had reached Elysium and you chose to be reborn and you again reached Elysium, you would reach some special
Rebirth is not there in Greek mythology. I've heard this from so many people.
Island of the tribes.
So, there are always exceptions. You'll find these things. So, metempsychosis is used a lot in the Greek philosophy. And I hear this every time I tell I speak to Englishmen and English scholars and professors from Oxford and I tell them there is no rebirth. They say, no, because you see, they have...
The island of the tribes.
The reason is because when the colonial powers came to India, they wanted to say that Indians are mythological and therefore like the Greeks. And from polytheism, you evolve, you civilize yourself to monotheism. And from monotheism, you civilize yourself to atheism. So from the polytheistic Vedas, you move towards the monotheistic Bhagavad Gita, and then gradually move towards quantum physics, which is atheistic and makes you. So this linear approach to life is a very Western way of thinking. It's a colonial way of thinking, and doesn't have to be. I don't have to carry that burden. Chinese don't agree with this ridiculous conception of world. Indians shouldn't.
So mythology. So you're saying that the way it has actually come up, it is not about, at least in the Indian way, right or wrong. It's about accounting. There's a cultural construct though, right? So is one of the most important aspects of mythology to set a certain cultural framework in which you can approach your life. So why the festivals? Why Holi? Why Diwali? Why are you doing X, Y, Z? There is a certain culture within which you're choosing to live your life.
Yes. So across the world, it's not just unique. Human beings need an operating system the way a computer needs an operating system. This is the best way to explain. Nowadays, everybody's so tech savvy. So Android operating system is different from a Apple operating system. They both have the same apps. They both will have WhatsApp, but an Android sits on a different operating system. An Apple sits on a different operating system. Mythology is like an operating system of the human mind. And that's the best way to explain it. So there's an operating system in the West where they use cutlery. There's an operating system in the East where they use chopsticks. There's an operating system in India where we use fingers. We think differently, we function differently, we judge life differently. And that is how it happens. So now look at how the Christmas is celebrated. Christmas is the birth of Jesus Christ, happens only in winter. The birth of Christ, which is a generative activity, is happening in winter when everything is dead in the West. In the Western higher altitudes. Spring is the time when we talk about his death and resurrection. So Good Friday and Easter Sunday is celebrated in spring. So it's contrary. So when nature is blooming, Jesus Christ is dying and his rebirth is happening. And when nature is sort of going through its death, the Savior is born. This is not happening accidentally. This is a construction by the culture to communicate certain ideas which have happened even from pre-Christian period. And they've put that thought together, and it happens very organically. It happens over generations. It doesn't have like one man has decided it. Same way in India, India doesn't have summer and winter. Our culture is based on monsoon, and everything revolves around the monsoon. So what is before monsoon and what is after monsoon. So our festivals are always following the monsoon cycle. In monsoon, the gods go to sleep. So 4 months gods go to sleep. So right now is the Chaturmasa period when the gods go to sleep, which means nothing is going to happen at this time. No farming. No, cows hate wet soil. So cows will stand in one place. If you go to Goa, you'll see on the tarmac roads, all the cows standing, and everybody wonders why only the cows are coming, not the buffaloes. Buffaloes love wet soil. Cows don't. Cows don't move. So the nomadic people couldn't move and that is why they said gods go to sleep. The merchants don't move. The hermits don't move. The war doesn't happen. And only when the monsoon season ends did the movement start again. And therefore, Diwali, Dasara is really the time when movement started, merchants started, pilgrims started, and all wars in India only took place in September, October, November. Only these 3 months. For centuries and centuries, even during Mughal times, war in India happens only in autumn. Sharad Purnima. That is when the Durga is being worshipped. Coincidence? No. It is basically the organic seasonal cycle. Now, this seasonal cycle, you won't find it in China because the monsoon doesn't exist in China in this format. So their festivals will follow a different format. So you find this kind of shifts in festivals and cyclicality.
So it's a two-way process then, if I understand you correctly. So the works of Indian mythology are not so much about right or wrong. It's not so much about good or evil. It's not even about God or, the devil. It's reflections of culture. They are feeding into culture and informing what the culture is, and they're also being influenced by the culture.
So history creates myth and myth creates history. So it goes Both ways. So with time, stories will change, and the changed stories will change your world also. So right now, for example, our stories are being changed because we are westernized, more and more westernized, and we are thinking right and wrong, and therefore our decisions are now based on right and wrong rather than accountability. Today's stories are very different from the stories we told 500 years ago, because today we are using a lot of right and wrong, right and wrong. I mean, sorry, just indulge me in this. Translate the word evil in Hindi.
I'm not sure that there is a word of this.
Exactly. Yeah. There isn't word, because the evil comes from cultures which believe you live only once, while India is a culture where we believe in rebirth. So our language doesn't have the word evil. It's diabolos for devil. You will not find a devil in India. So I see people struggling. They try to say Ravan, devil. And no, it doesn't work. You will have a good Rakshas, you will have a good Asura, you will have Devas who are not so good, falling down, up and down. So it's this balance sheet. We are a Baniya culture. We don't like to accept it. We want to be Kshatriyas, but actually we are controlled by Baniyas.
Okay, but you said, history and myth and the intersection between the two. That's interesting, because a lot of people try and say, these myths are actually telling the history. It is telling the Mahabharat. There was a war that happened at one time. Yeah. Where was it? What was the time period? Where was Kishkinda? Where was Lanka? Where is actually Ayodhya? We think we know, and we do try. We fight at great length about where the specific places were. How much of it is history? How much of it is just...
Everybody who tries to turn mythology into history is colonized, because his mind is thinking in literal terms. He's not thinking metaphorically. He thinks the world is... When you talk about ocean of milk, Vishnu sleeps on an ocean of milk. Indians weren't fools to believe there was an ocean of milk. It's a metaphor. The colonial mind cannot... Because the scientific mind cannot handle metaphors. We give science too much credit, right? And really, industrialization is a result of science. And science cannot understand metaphor. While mythology is only metaphor. It only uses the language metaphor. It's not mathematical. So mathematical language creates science and history, while metaphorical language creates mythology, art, literature. And therefore, they'll never see... There'll be this... Hindi mein bolenge, 36 ka aakada hai. They'll never see eye to eye. So when you're trying to look at Ram as a historical figure, you're missing the point. That when Valmiki ji is writing Ramayana, he's saying Ram is in your heart. He lives 24/7 all the time. That is the meaning of the word Sanatan. If it is Sanatan, it cannot be Aitihasik. Either you decide you want to be Itihas or you want to be Sanatan.
But we fight so much about history. It's politicized all the time. What exactly is being there in the history books? We argue, we fight about it. And the fact that therefore it is not codified. Maybe if it was codified and there's one version of it and it hadn't been... The Ramayan's been written in layers. I know you yourself have said the Mahabharat has been written in layers. Maybe it wouldn't have been that easy to politicize. Would it have been
one
easier?
God has not brought peace to the Middle East.
Yeah.
Right?
True.
So Jews have one God, Muslims have one God, Christians have one God. They keep squabbling with each other all the time, like cantankerous, childish, fighting over a piece of land. The most intelligent group of people who have won the maximum number of Nobel Prizes in the world cannot be friends with their neighbors. So tells you a lot about one God and one God mythology. So people love to fight, and we find excuses in gods and history and mythology. It's because we are not kind and generous people, and gods don't make us kind and generous. They just watch us fight and they enjoy. The Greek gods loved humans to fight so that they do not get toppled. The Olympians said the humans should fight so that we'll not be toppled the way we toppled the Titans, and the Titans toppled the giants. So they basically said humans have to keep fighting and keep themselves busy. When you read the Hindu mythology, they'll say that Devas and Asuras were always fighting, and therefore you never worship Devas or Asuras. You never worship Indra, who has the Lord of Paradise. You worship gods who are content. If there is no contentment, you will never create peace. There's no contentment in Israel. There is no contentment in America. There is no contentment in the Victorian Empire. There is no contentment in Hindu Rashtra. If there is no contentment, your Raja is not content. He will never be generous and kind. He is ambitious. He's a Bakasur. So
I was just about to say, I'm seeing traces of your latest book, Bakasur, in that where contentment is really one of the things that I think you are saying.
It is the deepest thought of the Vedas. The Vedas is about knowledge. And human beings are the only creatures in the planet who can be content. We can be content. It is a possibility. But human society is based, if you look at socialism, capitalism. It's all based on hunger, hunger, hunger. And long ago, if you read the Vedas, right from the first verse of the Vedas, it talks about the hunger of the gods. It begins with feeding the gods. And the gods, and then they start saying that, there is a God who's never hungry. And that God is one I worship, the one who's never hungry. And that's where Shiva and Vishnu as concepts emerge. Now, these ideas are ancient Indian ideas, but even I see the Gurujis talking in all their fancy dress costumes. They are so hungry all the time. You see them wanting attention, and you cannot establish dharma if you're not content.
Hunger is not just hunger for food. Hunger could be hunger for attention. It
Metaphor,
could be desire.
metaphor.
It could be all sorts of things.
It's a metaphor.
That's what you've done. A lot of management books also,
Yeah.
and a lot of lessons. And in Bakasur in particular, you seem to be saying this
Because I have worked.
If there's one thing in the scripture that's saying, it's being learned to be content.
No, it gives you not just learn to be content. It's not an instruction. It's not a prescription. It's a tool. Contentment is not a destination. It's a technique. It's a technique to create a great society. It's not a destination, be content. I can't tell you, it's not a commandment of God, be content. Because it's about a process by which, if you are content, you will create mangala. Mangala is the word which is used in India for an auspicious world where there is prosperity and there's peace and everybody has opportunities and everybody is happy. And they say to create mangala, to create this world which is positive and happy, you have to first be content. A discontented king cannot create an auspicious kingdom. Now, this is not Devdutt Pattanaik. This is the Vedas. The Vedas are very clear. If you're discontented as a leader, your ecosystem will never, ever be auspicious. Will never get good things. Will never be happy. I look at how Russia is functioning. I see how China is functioning, how India is functioning, how Sri Lanka, all the countries. We are talking in terms of becoming Bakasur. And I'm like, oh my God, our scriptures thousands of years ago you don't have to be a great civilization. Even a small tribal community would have figured it out. Someone in the jungle would have figured it out. The moment I'm content, I can genuinely see the problems of people around me. I can resolve the people. I can work with them. I can figure it out. And I think that language is missing in our country today. And it's coming. I've just decoded it. And I'm lucky to have decoded it. And, the thing is, in order to successfully decode it, you have to step out of the box. Current box is right and wrong, judgment. And we are too shaped by Western ideas. And today, when I look at Western ideas, the Western philosophers, whether it's Hegel or whether it's Machiavelli, or even the new ones who are talking about capitalism, socialism all the time and squabbling nonstop, or you're seeing people talking right on television, on Israeli-Palestinian conflicts. I'm like, oh my God, they're still using old models which have never been successful in history. Yeah. Never. Look at this. When you talk about one God or one thing solving, I just showed you the example of West Asia. One God doesn't solve the problem. Even in the religions which believe in one God, they fight with each other, Shia, Sunni and all that.
So in addition to contentment, one of the other aspects that would arise logically from everything that you're saying is that you should therefore have a culture also to have a certain amount of tolerance, because if here you're saying there's no one truth in anything, in what you should be, there's no agreement on what is right or wrong, there's no truth in everything. On top of that, you have so many different religions right here in India, which are operating, so many different languages, so many different regions, so many different ways of expressing yourself. You're unlikely to find contentment or auspiciousness or harmony if you can't learn to tolerate differences.
See, the richest community in India are the Jains. And the Jains have a very important concept which a Tirthankar taught. It's called Anekantavad. Pluralism before pluralism became cool. Diversity and inclusion is a new concept in the West. But thousands of years ago, the Tirthankara said, Anekantavad. If you want to be a merchant, understand the customer will not think like you. Everybody will think differently. Everybody belongs to a different space and time. You have to accommodate difference. So Anekantavad is a 3,000-year-old philosophy in India, not taught in our schools. We think pluralism and diversity and inclusion has to come from the West. We have to be teaching them. They should not be teaching us. But we have forgotten it. So Anekantavad is an idea. But, when we talk about Jains, we think only of vegetarian pav bhaji or Jain pav bhaji because we think of ahimsa. But the key concept in Jainism is called aparigraha. Don't be greedy. Which I tell my Jain friends, a little bit detail that you have forgotten. that your wealth is meant to be invested in society. Your wealth is all profit in the Hindu scheme is debt. So the more profit you have, the more debt, the more narak, only narak for you. Because you're not reinvesting it back in the market. So to create Vaikuntha, to create where Lakshmi is always walking your way, your wealth has to be constantly invested in others. It's not for you. Aparigraha. You don't own anything. Nothing belongs to you. Now that's a very powerful philosophical concept which the Jains have given us in our country. It should be taught in every schools and colleges. Aparigraha, which even the Jains have forgotten.
So when you're talking about communicating and passing on these lessons, I mean, let's face it, you're writing books and you're saying parents should be teaching their kids. Essentially, the way sometimes these things become mass is through mass media, right? The Ramayan and the Mahabharat back in the day when everyone used to watch them on Doordarshan. Now these films are coming. We just heard this massive new Ramayan coming. Do you think that's where a lot of people will get associated with?
No, not at all. Hinduism is not a missionary religion. The Pracharaks won't save the world. Pracharak means mission. Mission is a Western concept. Whether it is Chinmaya mission or Ramakrishna, this mission are missionaries. They didn't save the world. So this Hinduism is not about the teacher going to the student. It is about the student coming to the teacher. You don't give knowledge. You take knowledge. If you're not curious, all knowledge will lead to indigestion. So children have to be taught curiosity. You don't give them knowledge. I never give knowledge. I never market my books. Because my rule is that the Vedas are very, very clear on it. Never give knowledge to the unprepared. Because it will lead to indigestion. And that's a metaphor. So you can give as many Ramayan serials in the world. It's not going to give you what Valmiki ji is trying to teach.
You worked on them also?
Yeah, I do it. But I know that the book is useless. I have heard people reading my books and saying, Devdutt, as you said. And I'm like, I never said that. Because I'm like, it is a tragedy of a writer that no matter how much you write, you realize the person at the end of the day has to digest it himself. However beautifully I write it and however, it's like food, right? I can prepare the best meal in the world, which is the most nourishing meal in the world. But if you have got bacteria in your stomach, you're going to just shit it all out. And all the beautiful things I'm giving you will have no nourishment in your body. Right. So knowledge is something like that. So
but having worked with all of these great works of, you can call them mythology, works of art, call them whatever, literature, if not holy texts, are you somewhat surprised that no big movie, for example, has been made about the Mahabharat or a great series? I think many people feel that's the next big one that has to emerge.
For 30 years, I've been given a lot of money by filmmakers to consult them on projects. And then they end up producing whatever mediocre stuff they want to. Because at the end of the day, the film will be a function of the director, the producer, and the financer. None of whom are interested in improving society. They're interested in return on investment, on the money they're going to put in the business. So let's be very clear. They are businessmen. They are not interested in whether you're enlightened at the end of the movie. They are like, will the seats be full? Will I get return? So the interest is Lakshmi, not Saraswati. And Saraswati and Lakshmi don't get along. Saraswati comes everywhere. She's there everywhere and she survived. Kings have come and gone. Vedas are still around. The Brahmins did not share the Vedas with anyone and Max Muller comes and translates it for us. Some foreigner comes and translates. I can read the Vedas today not because the Brahmin translated it, it's because Max Muller translated it. Good, bad, indifferent, but I've got access to a translation because some foreigner came in and opened the floodgates for me. So I'm not a Brahmin. I wouldn't get access to the Brahmin. And even the Brahmins didn't know it. They'd forgotten by the time 18th century. They'd forgotten what it meant. So knowledge is not a function of these great television. It is, are children curious? I always check when I go to a classroom, when I sometimes deal with students of every age. I do children, I do every group, and I just see how curious they are. They ask me questions and I ask them questions back. And they say, sir, aap bahut question pooch rahe ho. I said, haan, dimag hai ki nahi tumhare paas? Because if I'm going to give you the answer, then you're lazy. And I don't want you to be lazy. It's like going to the gym. I can't outsource to the gym, right? I would love to outsource to the personal trainer and say, do the jogging for me. But I have to go to the gym. I have to do it myself. The same applies to your mind. You cannot give it to ChatGPT to answer your questions. You can. You'll always be the dumb. You'll always be dumb.
Okay. And
you'll wonder what went wrong with you.
So let me ask you, are you content or what more is still left to be done before you think you've repaid your debt?
No, I'm repaying my debt and I don't think I'll complete it in this lifetime. But I'm content. I'm more than content.
All right. I am getting content with the duration of this particular podcast. I'm going to end with just a few quick rapid fire questions, which is a format that we have. What's the most controversial opinion that's got you in trouble?
None.
You stayed out of it. You're lucky. A myth that you're tired of correcting people about?
Definition of Dharma.
And good versus evil.
The same. They all fall in the same thing.
Okay. The most feminist character in Indian mythology?
There are no feminists.
No
all
feminists.
are feminists. They're all feminists. Feminist is a Western concept. It's not.
Okay,
Indian.
they're all feminists. All right,
Yeah,
great.
all feminists.
Most misunderstood character?
Sita.
Oh, why?
Everybody loves Draupadi because she screams and yells and asks for blood. But it is Sita's children who become kings. Draupadi's children die. I think she's a very smart woman and ensured her children got the property. Draupadi's children didn't get property. So I don't think Draupadi's the smart
It's interesting.
woman.
Amish's work actually was more Sita-centric than many other retellings of the
He's a
Ramayana.
fiction writer.
Yeah, well, okay, fine. The character that Gen Z you think will relate to the most from Indian mythology?
All of them. They'll relate as much as their parents did.
Right. A mythological lesson that we need to learn in Indian politics.
Be content.
Right. I think that we are all getting increasingly. A scene from any of the epics that you have studied. You've studied so many. You've studied all of them. One scene that still gives you goosebumps.
Well, it is the Lakshman Rekha, where people think Lakshman Rekha is for Sita when it's actually for Ravan.
That's a really interesting. We want to elaborate on that because I think there's some very powerful lessons in that.
You see, if you start confusing me with fiction writers, this is what happens. People think mythology is the same as fiction. Mythology is about how cultures function. The Lakshman Rekha is not done for Sita. And I always hear how people use the word, "Tumhare ye Lakshman Rekha par mat karna." They're using it as a control tool because they're so westernized that they think that laws are meant to control the weak. Laws are meant to control the powerful, not the weak. Laws are completely, around the world, the purpose of law is to help the weak. Otherwise, you don't need laws, right? The powerful don't need laws. They can just go and take whatever they want. Ravan can just swoop in. In the original Ramayana, there is no Lakshman Rekha. He just comes in and swoops in. But he still doesn't come because he wants her to step out of the house. And to clarify that, they introduce the concept of Lakshman Rekha because it is the space between civilization and outside civilization. And the line is about how do you deal with laws? Laws do not exist for employees. They exist for employers. They exist for the powerful. So when I see a politician breaking the signal in the Bombay traffic and this cavalcade going, I said, that's adharma happening. That's adharma. Because he believes he is superior. He exists for the poor. He doesn't exist. Otherwise, we don't need kings. Why do we need kings? We can just have a jungle. Jungle mein, even the path in the jungle, the animal which has fed stops eating. But the human animal keeps eating relentlessly. He never gets satisfied. That is why we have laws. Laws were created because humans cannot control their hunger. And Lakshman Rekha is for Ravan to tell, you're an intelligent, educated man. Please know that this is someone else's wife and don't try to whitewash your crime as many fiction writers do. They try to write books on why Ravan was okay. I've heard feminists telling me that Ravan is fine and I'm like, oh really, women's consent doesn't matter. And then of course the feminists hate you because you don't realize that it's a book of consent. A woman, it's her consent and you're just rejecting a consent. The story of Surpanakha is about consent. The man is saying, I don't want to have sex with you, and you want to have sex with him. So it's so gender neutral, Ramayan and Mahabharat. There is a brother and a sister, both who want to have sex without consent. Surpanakha wants to have sex with a man without his consent, and Ravan wants to have sex with a woman without her consent. Now, this was written 2,000 years ago. It's about consent. It's about boundaries. Is it applicable to Gen Z, X, Y, Z, Alpha? It applies to everybody.
And the concept of the Lakshman Rekha is something that you should keep in your mind, especially if you are powerful. To say this is the line that you should not cross. Because the minute you cross that line,
society will collapse.
Society will collapse and you are then engaging
Because
in
then
adharma.
nobody respects your boundaries and Lanka is burnt. The poor people of Lanka suffer because your king did not respect another person's boundaries. Nobody respects your boundaries. And suddenly Lanka is being burnt by a monkey. And you're like, what happened? Your king didn't respect rules. The moment you break the rules, then the floodgates have opened. If the powerful do not respect the rules, then society will collapse. And you see it around us. You see it around America, China, India, wherever you go. So this applies to everybody. It doesn't apply to Indians alone. Ramayan can be told everywhere. If you explain the metaphor, people are too interested in the geography of Ramayan. They're not getting the metaphor of the Ramayan, which is about your mind. That's what the Valmiki is trying to explain.
I think those are some very powerful lessons for us to walk away with. And in particular, be content, I think, is something important for all of us to keep in mind.
Thank you.
Devdutt Pattanaik, it was such a pleasure. Thank you.
Watch my interview at the India Story podcast with Vikram Chandra on Hook.